Alright, hi, my name is Alec, and today I'm responding to a claim made by Daniel, in which he claims that public school education holds an edge over private school education. His secondary claims are that public schools offer a more varied and regulated education, public schools cater towards a more diverse demographic in comparison to private schools, and public schools score just as well or even better than private schools. In his first claim, he says that public schools offer a more varied and regulated education, but I claim that a more varied and regulated education isn't as significant as other factors. First off, my opponent said that teachers in private schools may not be required to have certification. Instead, they often have subject area expertise. Well, in an article by Huffington Post, many companies and educators agree that having work experience is generally more valued and important than education, which then translates into its teaching as well. Although these teachers do not have teaching backgrounds and credentials, they have real-world experience, which means students learn more about real-world application. Additionally, private schools have a better teacher-to-student ratio, and this diminishes the factor of having a more varied education. Although students in public schools may have more classes, private schools are often more specialized and have better teacher-to-student ratio. In a study by National Center for Educational Statistics in 2013, the same statistics that my opponent uses, they found that public schools teacher to student was 16:1, compared to 12:1 in private schools. Now, why does having a lower amount matter? In an explanation by Spring Arbor University, they described that fewer students per teacher make it easier for teachers to accommodate different learning styles. Some people learn better through hands-on activities, while others learn through taking notes. With a smaller class, it is easier for teachers to utilize varying strategies to help students do well. Since private schools employ this technique of having a lower student-to-teacher ratio, students are set up to learn in a better environment, meaning that public schools do not hold an edge over private schools. My opponent's second claim is that public schools cater towards a more diverse demographics in comparison to private schools. However, he fails to claim the benefits of having a diverse demographics and how that even holds an edge, as well as fails to use his evidence to support either his secondary or his primary claim. My opponent presented facts, such as how in fall of 2014, the percentage of students enrolled in the public and secondary schools who were white was less than 50%. He also presented facts of differences in racial composition in comparison between private and public schools, but does not link any of these evidence in that a diverse campus has a benefit or downside to a campus that is primarily one race. Hence, having a different demographic, as his evidence states, does not support his primary claim that public school education holds an edge over private school education. Additionally, NCES, again the National Center for Educational Statistics, reports that some earlier research, such as Green in 2001, found that individual private school students were more likely than those in public schools to be in racially mixed classrooms, showing that even if there were educational differences between private and public school demographics, it is inaccurate to make a sweeping statement that on all private schools and their demographics. My opponent's last claim is that public schools scores just as well or even better than private schools. However, this evidence is false in two ways. The study was conducted poorly and there's new evidence that supports otherwise. My opponent used a study by National Assessment of Educational Progress, which concluded that grade 4 public schools scored better in math, while grade 8 private schools scored better in reading. However, a new study immediately following this NAEP conducted by Harvard University accomplished two tasks. First, it critiqued the method in which NAEP achieved their data, as well as conduct a study of their own, except with a method that is non-biased. Harvard found two major problems with NAEP's study. First was that it was inconsistent in classification of student characteristics across sector, as well as inclusion of student characteristics open to school influence. This means that NAEP was comparing grade A public schools to grade C private schools, and that was not a direct comparison. They also factored in location, demographic makeup, and other factors, which means they weren't making a general sweeping comparison. In Harvard University's study, they concluded that the test scores of private schools were better in both math and English from both grade 4 and grade 8, showing that the private schools were actually scoring much better than public schools, opposite of the evidence my opponent suggested, and opposite of my opponent's proposition. To conclude, my opponent stated that public school education holds an edge over private school education, but the failure of reasoning, the lack of evidence, and the failure usage of evidence shows otherwise. Thank you. It's tough for me, man.
Sounds like I made it easy for you.
All right, Alec, you labeled the claims clearly. There's a good listing of the secondary points. On the first point, you've got a counterclaim, and you are basically arguing that there's issues about the significance of that particular point. I like the approach that you're taking there. The idea that the work experience of the instructors is more important than whether or not they have a teaching credential. And as you said at one point, there's not really a demonstration, like you said down below, that there is some benefit from the instructors having these kinds of things that they lack apparently in the private schools. And then you offer a good counterclaim on the teacher-student ratio and suggest a reason why that's important. So I thought that was very effective. On the second argument, about the diversity issue, I thought that you made some good challenges, again, about the link to whether or not there is any advantage, the absence of evidence from the advocate on that. That was pretty straightforward. There was an interesting piece of evidence that you had at the end of that section where it basically suggests that even though there might be a smaller percentage in the school itself, the chances were greater that they would have a greater diversity in the classrooms. And one of the things that you might make reference back to is that teacher-student ratio in the classrooms, because you're much more likely to distribute everybody among a smaller group of classes where you get diversity in the classrooms. And that's, I think, the explanation for that particular point. And then on your last point, you went after the research that the advocate used. I thought you had a legitimate criticism of it. You had updated research that was directly addressing the criticism that you talked about there, and that's a very effective way to respond to that particular point. Could do a little bit less reading, but that happens. So you had a lot of information. All right.